Okay, so here is just what a neuron looks like. And if you guys don't know what a neuron is, our brain is made up of billions of neurons, bro. Billions of neurons. And neurons, what they do is they help send signals to other parts of our brain to, and that's what creates our movements and what creates our thoughts and what creates everything we know about human functioning, right? And it all starts with the neurons, right? And this is like the different parts of the neurons. If you're in a neurology class or a neuropsychology class, you'll probably have something like this, which is just different parts of the neuron and how it works. So let me just break it down. And I found something a model that actually worked, that was very specific, that makes sense and talks about different parts very well. So dendrites, as you see, the little branches from the cell body, those are the parts of the neuron that receives and sends signals, right? So, well, they receive signals and then it's shot out towards the as you see the small little like terminal parts. All right, so specifically, dendrites receive electrical signals from other neurons, and it's pretty much passed around to specific parts of the brain that have to do with certain functioning, right? So what we know, there's 4 different parts of our cortex, right? So there is the frontal lobe, which is with your prefrontal cortex, has to do with executive functioning, decision making, and all the important functionings. That's usually the last part that all the neurons go to, right? And the reason for that is because the signals are usually sent from our different receptors. So whether it's visual, through our optic nerves, it's sent all the way to our brain, or if it's from touch, we have, you want to know why your fingertips are the most sensitive parts of your body? Is because there are a shit ton of, there's a lot of neural activity goes on in the front, in your like fingertips, in your toes, wherever it is. There are signals that are sent straight from our body that go into our central nervous system and that are shot up to our brain. All right, so that's why touching, some people feel like they have a lot more sensitivity in touch. That's probably because they have a lot more like sensitivity to like neural ingestion, right, through our touching. There's our nose, where smell, we have inner hairs in our nasal cavity, which are sent to our brain. And then in our ears, we have hair in our ears that send signals to our brain as well. Taste. Our taste buds, they send neural signals to our brain. Or they send signals to our brain, which gives out neural signals. Right? So there's a lot of different ways we receive information, and our brain decodes what that information is. Biology with Poiboitv, yes. Well, neurobiology, if you want to be specific. I am not a specific man to biology and all that stuff. I got a C in biology, so let me tell you something. Biology ain't my thing. The body is one thing, the mind is another thing. Neurology, I did okay. I got an A-, so I think I'll be okay here. But here we go. We have the different parts of the neuron. Signals are passed to the hypothalamus, and then the hypothalamus, which is the dead center of our brain, sends out signals to other parts of the brain. So I was saying frontal lobe is specific to the prefrontal cortex, and it has to do with like decoding information and executive functioning and like decision making, all that stuff. The parietal lobe, which is across the center here, if you see me, it's like kind of like my mic. You see my mic or my headset, it's kind of like that. That's where my parietal lobe is. And that has to do with sensory motor stuff, has to do with like anything sensational. And usually that gets sent to the prefrontal cortex as kind of like that pathway, right? If we want to react to something, it might go to our hypothalamus, then to our parietal lobe for sensory, and then it goes straight to our prefrontal cortex where we make decisions, and that's how we move and do all this stuff, right? We want to jump. Okay, we jump, goes to parietal lobe, goes straight to our prefrontal cortex. We want to eat. We get the smell, we get hungry, it goes to our parietal lobe, it goes straight to our prefrontal cortex. Now, visuals, anything visual goes to our occipital lobe. Our occipital lobe is in the back of our brain, all the way to the back of our brain. And there are different levels of sensation in our occipital lobe that has to do with what we see, right? And that gets sent all the way around to our prefrontal cortex, right? So all the way to our parietal lobe to our prefrontal cortex, right? And then we have our temporal lobe, which is on the sides of our on the side, like you see where our temples, right? What that has to do with learning and memory, and it has to do with all the things that we have to do with like when we read and we make sense of what we read. That has to do with our temporal lobe and how we make meaning. That's called there's Wernicke's area, which is meant for taking meaning out of things, and then there is Brokaw's area, which is like learning, right? So we read, we learn what's going on, we make meaning out of it. That goes in our temporal lobe, and then our prefrontal cortex tells us, okay, this is what we're going to do with this information. Okay, so that's kind of like the gist of like the four kind of categories of our top area of our brain. Then we have the midbrain, and then we have the hindbrain, which is where with the central. It's with like the central nervous system, where we have to do with like balance and everything. That's the hindbrain. Midbrain is like kind of like the first stop of like information getting passed on from our senses. Okay, so that's just a big like that's just like a brief summarization of our. It's called the cerebral cortex, which is all four of those areas, right? So here, this is just the parts of the neuron, you know, how they work, how signals are released to the cell body through the dendrites, and then it's released out through the axons, right? And then, again, there's 1 billion neurons in our brain, right? So all those signals are being passed into a general direction of our brain, right? And what research has seen is that everybody's brain is different, but they function the same way. How sensory input can be sensitive for some compared to others. Like, you know, if I hear something, you know, as a counselor, as a therapist, I might hear something very distressing and very, like, you might feel very, very, you know, sentiment towards that person. But because I hear certain things a lot, like I hear a lot of different, like, stories and a lot of situations from people, I might feel a little desensitized to the information, and I might have more clarity over the information they're giving me, right? But for others, they might get really taken back by people's stories and by people's, you know, situation, because they are not used to that, right? Especially those who, you know, might not have as much of an eventful life to say, oh wow, this is crazy, right? But everybody goes through their own shit. Everybody has their own level of tolerance towards, you know, information we pass on, right? When we're young, right, if developmentally we, like, say I was in martial arts, right? I've been punched in the face a lot, right? I've wrestled, right? Like I know what it takes to put my body through suffering in order to grow physically, right? And mentally. But other people who haven't been in martial arts and might have played, like, I don't know, soccer or some other shit, they might not know what it feels to get punched in the face or to get hit. So the impact of getting hit, or how we understand, how our brain understands the impact of our body, like, holy shit, like, that's like something completely different from, like, say, what Poi gets, right? So our brains are all different, but they all work the same, okay? And we're going to get more into that. So, yes, just a big, brief overview. You know, how our brain, you know, gets electrical currents. There's two ways in which our brain passes on information. It's through chemicals and through electrical patterns, okay? And we're going to mainly talk about electrical patterns because that's mainly, you know, the biggest source of information or the biggest understanding information being passed on through the brain. So I just found this this little description of, like, the basics of brainwaves. So what we're going to talk about a little bit, so there are 4 different types of brainwaves. Okay, there's I'll go down the list. So there's beta, which is where we are completely conscious and aware of everything around us. So yeah, beta is when we're fully awake, we're fully conscious, we retain information. When you're at work, when you are, you know, say I'm streaming and I'm doing a lecture, I'm completely in my beta stage right now, right? Like I think and again, electrical patterns in the brain or electricity is measured by hertz, right? So it's about, what is it? 13 to 38 hertz, which is most active state, right? Most active brain state, right? So then we move on to alpha. And alpha is like when you're, like, bored, or when you're just kind of passively sitting there chilling, you know, like, say if I was playing video games, I'd be bouncing around beta and alpha, right? I'd be passing around beta and alpha. If I was, like, if we were to talk about theta, which is a little bit more like being relaxed, being sleepy, being, like, very just kind of, like, shrugged down, more or less. Theta is more about subconscious activity, where you're starting to daydream a lot more, and you're starting to feel like, you know, like your brain, like, is kind of like taking a break, more or less. So when you see daydreaming, you more or less see theta waves, right? How many of you have ever been in class or at work or just, like, somewhere, like, in an environment that's, like, very boring, very chill, and you just start to daydream? You just start to think about random shit, you know, like I daydream a lot because I have ADHD, so my mind just goes to different places, man. So I start to think about, yeah, very often, Tano, yeah, that means that theta waves are being sent out on a frequent basis in that environment when you don't get enough sleep and you have to do these daily responsibilities. You're more likely to daydream or to drift off, right? So those are theta waves. Those are parts of the brain which kind of they're kind of like warning signs. You know how when you fart, it might mean you need to go poop? It's kind of like those farts where you just need to just think about, okay, maybe I might be a little sleepy, I might be a little tired. And then you have delta. Delta waves are when you're completely asleep, when your brain is taken over, like, when you're active. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Occurs when you're during sleep. See, I was right. As you can see, it says below 4 hertz, so that means there's not a lot of brain activity going on, man. there's not a lot going on. So that means that, you know, like, you might have random, you know, memories being shot out there, and you know, when you wake up and you're like, wow, that's a weird dream, it's probably because there's just random brainwaves just being shot out. But those memories or those people, figures, whatever those are, they're important and significant in your life. You know how we always start out a dream midway through, right? We never start at the beginning or the end. That's because your brain is just creating a, you know, an environment that you just aware, that you know of. They're creating, it's putting figures and people that, like, you recognize, right? The situations you might have been before, or a heightened situation in which you've been in that situation, but it's at a more sensitive state, right? Hydrate, I got you. Appreciate you, Tano. That's what it really means to be in a brain, in a sleep mode, is when delta waves are taking over in your brain, and your body at the same time, while delta waves are being passed along, your body is recuperating. It's at its most heightened rested state, so that your physical body can replenish and take over, right? Your parasympathetic nervous system, what we talked about, rest and digest, is taking over. And that's what's important. So that's why sleep is very, very important, right? While your brain is occupied through delta waves, and it has limited amount of brain activity, your body can recuperate and regenerate. That's why it's very important to get some sleep, right? So, as you know, they talk about sensory motor rhythm. So again, in our parietal lobe, how are the sensations, the sensory motor cortex, and all that part. That has to do with how we like intake that information, right? And then how we release information is through executive functioning and prefrontal cortex, right? So our waves are very important, right? Because if we're conditioned to stay focused and be aware of our surroundings and be at our most heightened state, that means that we have a good amount of beta waves, which say that, like, okay, you're awake, you're functioning properly, you're absorbing information properly, you are doing what you need to be doing, you're focused, whatever. Anxiety, stress, right? We talked about the HPA axis, or the we talked about, like, the pineal gland, right, which releases hormones such as adrenaline and cortisol, right? That keeps your body awake, or keeps your mind awake, right? Cortisol is meant for, like, stress hormone. So if there is, like, big heart for Poiboitv, say, what? What's up, brother? We're just talking about brainwaves, my man. Just a quick little lecture. Talking about different parts of the brain. We talked about that, different parts of the neuron. Now we're talking about different brain waves, and how brain waves have to do with wakefulness and fatigue, right? So beta, you want to be in beta when you're working. You want to be conscious and aware of what you're doing, right? Just doing in between cues. Hey, that's all good, man. Welcome to the discussion, man. And guys, feel free to chime in if you guys have anything to say about brainwaves, or about, like, anything, like, regarding, like, oh, sometimes, like, I feel tired in certain situations. I feel like I'm not doing certain things, or maybe you want to, a little bit about what we're talking about. Please chime in. Feel free. So yeah, and there's a lot of studies linking what we do as responses to the certain brainwaves that we give off, right? If, say, we're playing video games, This is kind of like a video game edition of brainwaves. So the next part is how our video games affect our brain. And then we start to talk about a specific type of part of our brain, which is called the limbic system, or the pretty much the reward pathway, right? When we talk about playing video games and getting a certain amount of release of neurotransmitters, such as like dopamine, which is like what makes us feel good, right? Or serotonin. Serotonin is what makes us awake, right? So when we are in beta, when we're awake, or when we wake up, we go from melatonin, which is a neurotransmitter that keeps us tired, right? And then we switch that to serotonin, which keeps us awake, right? And then vice versa. If you're about to go to sleep and you're in theta, you have theta waves going off, and you're getting tired, it's turning serotonin into melatonin. So it's vice versa. And then you'll end up in the delta stage, which is falling asleep, right? So here for video games, when we find something that we love to do, right, we consider it our self-care, and we gain the most amount of neurotransmitter release, such as dopamine. For exercise, it could be endorphins, right? When you play a game that you love, you go from being in a theta beta stage to a theta alpha stage, where you're just kind of daydreaming, you're bored, you're chilling, not much brain activities going on, and then you go into a beta stage where there's the most brain activity. Or sometimes people that don't like to keep their mind occupied, right? Some people like to keep their mind occupied, some people don't want to think about things, and it's vice versa. Video games provides both. You can be active. You could be as active as possible. I could be in a battle royale. I could be playing fucking Warzone, and I could be going the fuck in, dropping like 20 bombs. I'm at my beta stage, right? And there's certain game modes we know we have to be awake for, right? Like sometimes, if for my squadron players, like you can be in between beta and alpha, because you're flying around, you're chilling, you're doing certain patterns in your ships that you love, that keeps you engaged, right? And then you get into like, okay, we're on attack, right? So we have to, put as much damage as possible and try to win the game here, right? On the first phase. Then you're on beta, right? You go from alpha chilling on defense to beta trying to fucking do as much damage as possible. You're awake, you're attentive, you're ready to go, right? So there's this understanding of when you play a game and you've played it so long and you've been there to the point where, like, I played like over 100 hours of this game. I know how it works. Like fleet battles where, you kill the objectives and then you go home, right? Where you go into this mode, sometimes we call it's a part of the theta stage, where you go into this trance where you kind of lose yourself. Now, it's not to say that you're tired. It's not to say that you are bored or anything. It's just you've done this so much and for so long that there's not that much brain activity going on, and so you kind of lose yourself in whatever you're playing, right? So when you play Warzone, it's a little bit more active of a game mode, right? Because you always have to be awake. But there's certain parts in the game where you're just chilling, letting your guys, respawn, getting their shit, and you're just chilling in the back, just camping and waiting. You might flip from beta, which is the most active state, to alpha, which is where you're just chilling. right? So if you think about the brain, it is actually a lot more simpler than you think, ladies and gentlemen. It is more about the action potentials. So how our brain functions is neurons fire, right? In certain parts of our brain, neurons fire, right? Where it just kind of like a wave, right? Which we call brain waves. It spreads throughout the brain. Okay? So when it has the action potential where multiple neurons fire in one location and it spreads out, then that's what's considered as brain activity, right? When those neurons fire, right? Now, the rate in which it fires is what is called the frequency, and that frequency is measured in hertz, right? Hertz is the amount that is being fired in a certain duration of time, right? So I found this study because it talks about how, first of all, the data here is correct, right? The data, you want to make sure you have the facts straight, okay? I want y'all to tell me, what do you think is the average age of people playing video games in the United States? Do you think it's kids? Do you think it's adolescents? Do you think it's young adults? 19. Okay, Tano. 19. Anybody else? Anybody else? I will literally send you, if you guys, 19 or 17? Okay. Anybody else? Any guesses? The average age of people playing video games in the United States. Nobody? Okay. The average age of people playing in the United States, and this has been confirmed, is 35 years old. 35 years old. And think about how many people are in the United States. That's right, Tano. 35 years old. So out of how many people are in the United States? Like 400 nearly 500 million. 150 million people have been confirmed. This is 2016, so this is not as accurate. So there's probably, you could add on another 50 mil right there. Oh, well, thank you, Tano. Appreciate that. So there you go. There's the amount of people in the United States currently, I guess. Right? So 72% of these people have said that are older than 18 of the 150 million that they got here. 71% indicated that video games are a positive influence on their child's life. So I guess that's from a parent's perspective. So that means that 71, so that means that 29% believe that video games have negative effects on their kids. And that might be right. Because how parents try to measure how their kids are doing, for the most part, is by behavioral patterns. If kids are playing over 7 hours a day of video games, they're probably more likely going to be concerned that they're not doing what they need to do, right? But what happens when a kid is doing everything they need to do and they're playing 7 hours a day? Stimulation is very important for human beings. It's very important for those who Okay, so stimulation is very important for us, right? Because for us, stimulation means that our brain is being occupied and doing the right things, right? We're getting a lot of positive reinforcement from our neurotransmitters, from our body to our mind. We're getting a lot of good stuff out of it because we are doing the right things, right? We're getting exercise, or we are reading a book, or we're we're doing something intellectual for the most part, but we're also utilizing, you know, a certain amount of creativity and intelligence, right? So what's important is that when you're talking about healthy habits, is talking about the amount of brainwaves or the route of brainwaves that are being used, right? So for example, if you're playing Minecraft and you're building and you're getting something out of it, you might be in between beta and alpha stages, but you're also utilizing parts of your brain that has to do with creativity, right? If you are playing, say you're in the military and you're, you know, playing Call of Duty, I guess, and you're looking at the guns and you're getting more stimulated by, you know, builds and loadouts and all that stuff, then you're gonna have certain brain waves that you're gonna have more beta waves that act up when things go right for your loadout, right? Just like for Minecraft, you're more in an active state when you're finishing up something or you're creating something out of nothing, and there you go. I'm not going to bring up, I wanted to not bring up GTA, but GTA, if you are creating your own business, doing something, you might have a lot of beta waves that fire off because you are doing something that you love to do and that creates more stimulation, right? So same thing can be said for anything you guys do in life, right? You have more action potentials regarding beta waves when you are doing something you love to do, when you feel stimulated. And stimulated means you're focused, you're on target. You're on target. I'm sorry. But you're most likely awake and you're ready and you're good to go because you're doing something that you love to do and that you're focused on. And that also has to do with that neurotransmitter release in regards to being awake and attentive, right? And so that's where healthy habits come from, is from doing something you love that is not unhealthy, that is, I guess, a part of social norms, but you guys can make that assumption. So, this was talking about first-person shooters and genres. Thank you, stirring. Okay, so we also talk about that conversation about, you know, first-person shooters or like a violent video games creating, you know, violent behaviors. That also has to do with other parts of your brain, such as like decision making, and it has to do with how we process information and all that stuff. Our brainwaves, as I said, are released all in different ways, but they're all the same, right? So we might be stimulated playing, you know, say, Gears of War, and chainsawing somebody down. But how we create meaning out of these games is really a whole different scenario, right? So that's the difference between biology and how we conceptualize cognition, right? So that's kind of like the difference in the debate between, does violent video games create violent behaviors? It really depends on the difference between brain activity and like how things are fired off in our brains, and the action potentials and the brainwaves that go along with it, and how we conceptualize things. Sensation and perception, right? So there's the difference. That's why this has always been a big debate, is because, you know, we're talking about neurology and we're talking about perceptual thought, right? Both of them are the same, but they have different... They work in different ways as much as they work in similar ways. So I found this article. This talks about effects and involvement and degree of playing video games in the brainwaves. So let me show you. Oh, fuck. Wait, hold on. Here it is. This is just... Here we go. So as you can see, if you are into neurology or neurobiology or neuropsychology, whatever you want to... If you're into, you know, brain imaging, you've probably have seen this before. And what it is if you could see the degrees, if you look, the degrees in which brain activity is being fired off in certain parts of the brain. And as you can see, it's kind of like a wave. How, if you see the darker yellow and red areas, that means there's more brain activity going on in those areas of the brain compared to the blue and the green and the lighter areas, which means there's limited amount of brain activity. So what I can see from this is pretty much that, you know, there is a degree, there's a spectrum of brain activity going on, you know, in these images, but also going on in all of our brains. How we conceptualize and perceive things might elicit certain brain activity. Our response might be different from others, right? Our sensation, like say we have a phobia of dogs. When we hear barking, some people might be chill and might be like really lovey-dovey, and they might want to be like, oh my god, I want to pet this dog. And then other people might get scared and they might flee away, right? So when we talk about disorders and we talk about trauma and we talk about all these things, there's a certain amount of beta waves that are sent off, or there's a level of beta waves that are sent off, or a certain amount of hertz that are being sent off, that elicit certain behaviors that go on, that reactions, right? How we react to our environment. That has to do with, you know, memory. That has to do with, you know, our mind-body experience of just how we interact with things that we've already interacted with, right? Conditioning, right? How things over and over again elicit certain behaviors, right? So I thought you guys would be interested in checking this out, seeing this this spectrum of brain activity. And again, everybody's different in a lot of different ways. So if you see somebody who gets scared of insects or gets scared of certain things that you might not see as a threat, that's because they've been conditioned a certain way. So always keep that in mind, ladies and gentlemen. Now I want to talk a little bit about video games and our mind. Right? How we control our environment with our mind. Jedi mind tricks, if you may. Right? And what that is really when we interface with when we play video games, we all have different preferences. Some play controllers, some play mouse and keyboard, some play on VR, joystick if you're a flight sim. You know, everybody's different and and are conditioned in a certain way, right? Right? Obi-Wan Kenobi. Well, yeah, I mean, if we're talking about, listen, you guys are about to figure out that neural engineering is very close to coming up with a certain brand of games in which you can control with your mind, and that has to do with Neurable. Neurable is it's a company that hires scientists to create create mind-body experiences, right? Neural information being passed on into the game and creating this interaction between the mind and the game, right? Just kind of taking it straight to the source, right? And pretty much what they are is that you see these different, like, motherboards and like how they're being utilized and all that stuff. Yes, Neuralink. Exactly. And what I thought was so interesting is that neural engineering has come to the point where we can control, if you think about it long and hard enough, you can make things with a certain pathway, you can actually interact with your environment. Oh, you did? Very interesting. So Tano, you know all about this stuff. So you know all about how this communicates with our brain. So the interaction or certain parts of these, kind of how we're strapped in an EEG or electrical encephalogram. Like pretty much we're hooked up to this machine, and we send signals to our brain to interact with, what game we're being played. So pretty much our thoughts being in our brain waves send off signals, and that elicits us to make certain movements in like certain games. So we're not very far from being Jedis, and that's why I said Obi-Wan, because we are becoming Jedis as people. We're starting to create this interface, which is really cool, man. Like, we've come a long way as human beings, and with technology, we've come a long way to interfacing with technology. Brain-computer interface, right there. And you can do it with like headsets, like you can listen to music, change the playlist. Is Force is strong with you? Listen, man. I always say this, knowledge is power, my friends. Next is the lightsaber. Let me just create my lightsaber real quick. I just need to get the materials. And obviously, I need my crystal. I need my kyber crystal, my man. So, how do we increase... The last thing I'm going to touch on is how do we increase healthy brain activity? And I found this kind of like this little article talked about like all the different ways you can elicit healthy brain activity. And it's usually through our behaviors. Because our mind and body interaction is always going to be important. What we eat also has chemical releases that help our body, but also our mind. That's a part of the chemical part of, interaction with our brains. But also, when we do things that we feel like is healthy, we gain the most neurotransmitters out of those, because we know that that's what we want and that's what we need, right? So when we get it, there's like a sense of relief, like we did what we needed to do. So these are like 47 ways in which we boost our brain power and like we create healthy brain activity. So fitness, right? Listening to good music, right? Using our senses pretty much, strength training, dancing. My mom actually wrote a book about it. She wrote 2 books about dancing and how our brain goes into, again, a trance, which is like it's kind of like going in an interaction between alpha and theta stage where, we're just kind of losing ourselves into what we're doing because we've done this for so long. Is she an author? Yes, she is. She's an author. She goes by a different alias. She goes by an Arabic alias. But yes, I can. If you guys want me to, I can like kind of show you the books that she was writing and talk about it, because she talks about brain. She talks about brain waves and how dancing interacts with that. But that's a whole nother story. So golfing. So sure, it's doing something relaxing, but you're also getting outside, getting vitamin D. You have to anticipate your shots, sensory motor control, all that stuff. Yoga, mind body. Sure, why not? Okay, Tano, I got you, bro. Yeah, yoga, like, again, yoga is more about mindfulness, um, getting inside your head, what thoughts, what part of your cognition is needing repair and needing more solution-based kind of counseling by yourself, right? How do you, what does certain events mean to you? And you're doing all of this while exercising, right? And that's why yoga is so peaceful and so enlightening, because you're really doing basic poses. At the same time, your mind is stretching. While your body is stretching, your mind is stretching. And that's really important for brain imagery. Or, I'm sorry, for the brain waves that go on in your mind. Because when brain waves fire off, when you're doing certain things like thinking about, you know, what peaceful state of mind, or like an environment that you feel like you're comfortable in, or like there's certain parts of your sensory perception, such as like sunlight, or like grass, or like, you know, you smell like just nature, or you hear, you know, like kids laughing, or you hear like wind blowing, whatever it is. When you have that sensory information being passed on, that really elicits more more peaceful, more of a peaceful center within, then you start to actually gain a lot more out of it. But again, the course was canceled after a few weeks. Hey, my actually, hopefully my sister-in-law very soon will, she does yoga, so I'd like to have her maybe on board, and she could do yoga on like, I'll pay her to come on and do some yoga with us. What do you guys think? We'll have a yoga session? That'd be cool. That'd be real cool. Do some yoga stretching, man. I could do that. I could hire her for a session. Good night's sleep. Power naps. Yes and no. Power naps might be good, right? You need to get that rest, but you also feel drowsy for the rest of the day, and you're always stuck in that theta state where you're just always like droozing off, but you're also awake. So it's like it kind of flickers between all these different brain waves. So I don't know. It's on you. Breaking routine, doing something new might help, right? Like if you try, everybody should try everything once, right? If you don't like it, then don't do it again. But you should try to get as much new experiences as possible, so that your brain is continuously active and you gain all this knowledge that maybe others haven't gained, and that really provides you with that understanding that you can pretty much do anything, or you can do whatever you want, right? It gives you that sense of courage, that inner strength, right? Going to new places, meeting new people, opening yourself up, really, is very important for your mind-body experience, because you put yourself in new situations and things start to tend to get a little less awkward, a little less weird, and what have you. So open yourself up to new experiences, ladies and gentlemen. Doodling, if you're artistic, just drawing things, whatever image is in your brain, putting it down on paper is sometimes really helpful. Gives you that artistic appeal, but it also allows you to connect with yourself. And I've always thought that art therapy is a huge thing. I've always been a proponent of art therapy, because it allows you to really connect with your inner self. Flossing, just taking care of your body, really trigger immune response. Lawn mowing, just have you guys ever like found peace in like cleaning? And that sometimes provides that sense of relief, or most of the time it provides that sense of relief, right? If you have OCD, you might not get that sense of relief too much, because the more you do it, the less you gain, like, you feel like you need to do it, but you never get that relief. But sometimes when you set a day aside to just do cleaning, it's actually really peaceful. So guys, and also scientifically proven, a cluttered environment relates to a cluttered mind. So like around my desk is a little bit cluttered, so you guys can't see it, and I'm gonna make sure y'all don't see it, but it also means that, like, you know, like, I need to do some things. I need to get up and I need to clean, and I need to, like, feel that sense of relief that I've moved forward, right? So cleaning, also a very good aspect towards pushing yourself forward in a mindful state. Writing by hand, sometimes if you're more of an analytic person, writing things down is also great. Sharpening senses. Sex, obviously, sex releases oxytocin, which is really good. It's called the love drug. So when you have sex, or you consistently have sex, you're biologically releasing endorphins and neurotransmitters, which makes it so addictive, right? So having a healthy amount of sex is also very important. Positive relationships, especially with your family, is also very important. Pleasant conversations, right? Something you can take home with you and say, hey, that was really something memorable. Like, I like that person. I like what we talked about. I love that we talked about certain things that we don't usually talk about, and I came to a positive conclusion from that conversation. Very important. Thinking about ancestors, connecting with your heritage is also very important if you are culturally bound by a certain culture, right? A certain heritage. It might be important to do those rituals because they allow you to connect with your ancestry or your some say your past self sometimes, but it's really to connect with your family, connect with, something bloodbound, right? Meditation, always good. Meditation is also very, like, this could be considered meditation, but it's really important that you try to separate, being in a peaceful environment, calm, and, like, using introspection compared to losing yourself into a video game and virtual reality, right? Sometimes it's very important to separate the two. Lying down, that when you lie down, you're automatically switching your brainwaves, right? If you've worked a lot and you're starting to get tired, you might start to be you're like consistently flickering between beta and alpha state waves. You might want to lay down and flicker between alpha and theta stages, right? Put your body at ease, right? And even delta waves, right? Like, go to sleep. Omega-3, so that has to do with omega-3 fatty acids, has to do with, like, nutrition. Nutrition has to do with release of, like, when you eat good things, your body gives back positive signals to yourself, right? If I eat a salad or eat, like, vegetables I like or fruits I like, and make a healthy lean meal, right? Like, I might feel that brain power if I'm getting all the nutrients I need, and I feel psychologically, like, awake, ready. I won't need anything else, right? Spices, vitamins, complex carbs, coffee. Sometimes coffee is good, but you have to limit yourself to the amount of caffeine you ingest, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry, but it's true. Too much caffeine is not good because you're gonna fuck with your circadian cycle. You don't want to fuck with your wakeful state and your sleeping state, right? So if you get a cup of coffee to boost your serotonin levels, fine. Go for it. I'm allergic to coffee. Okay, well, you don't have to worry about that. You can also find, if you do stretching in the morning, if you do exercise in the morning, a release of endorphins, and that release of serotonin is really helpful, right? So exercising in the morning, practicing mindfulness in the morning is also very important. Doing something you love helps you get out of that helps get away from, that theta alpha stage and gets you back into the beta stage, right? So glucose, learning, novelties, speaking out loud when you hear yourself talk, it gives you a certain amount of, it gives you a certain reinforcement, right? Like when I go back and I watch like the videos, sometimes I'll be like, why did I stutter? Why did I say some stupid shit? Like I might have a negative reaction, but I also learn for the next time, right? So conditioning yourself is really important. Learning a second language, keeping yourself busy is also good. With our lecture, again, we were talking about brainwaves. It was awesome to talk about, like, just to kind of give you a brief overview of like what brainwaves do, certain brainwaves do, and how that relates to our mind-body experience.